provide that service for us, and that will be the standard that we will live at going forward. Secondly, I think that there are going to be students and parents who actually will want to have a way of staying, if you will, maybe even as much as a semester or more, but may want to actually, in effect, stay true to a e-learning platform in which they take their courses that way. And we need to be responsive to that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if out of all of this, we've learned how to perfect or strengthen the opportunity and the access for students and parents through the use of electronics. I do feel that the sort of next wave of this, however, will involve people coming back to school. And in their coming back, I think there have to be appropriate attention given to, frankly, loss of family members, loss of friends, loss of life that may have happened. I think that there's a whole safety net, if you will, an empathic notion that people are sad about loss. There may be students who've been deeply impacted by this because of losses in their family. I think we need to try to find a way of being able to be respectful and responsive to that. I also think that the academic side of the house needs to ultimately gear up as soon as possible, get students engaged on grade level material, things that they were doing before the coronavirus hit, ways by which they can begin to both tell their story about it, but also engage in the academic disciplines that they desperately need for graduation. And I think we got to have some good answers about credits and credit accumulation for high school students. We have to have probably an additional sideline opportunity for people to make up course credit that they may feel that they'd like to make up or do additional work in beyond what they've been able to do online in this interim period. So I think that there are stages of this, Marlon, that I view as being both necessary and useful to people feeling safe, but also getting back to the regular disciplined sort of behavior of school attendance, both for them as well as for their teachers and principals.
No, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Crew. Next, we have Richard Belcher, WSB-TV.
Good morning, sir. The New York State Controller criticized about $120,000 worth of spending at Medgar Evers as being improper or unsupported. That was on your watch. Do you take any responsibility for that?
I take responsibility for everything that happens, anything that's under my watch. I mean, this is a college that has had no real changes in its base revenue for quite some period of time. There have been dollars that we've brought in by virtue of additional fundraising and activities among donors. But there's no impropriety that I participated in. There's no finding there that was about any impropriety. This really had to do, as I recall, with audits that had been done prior in a number of different areas, and the actual amounts of those dollars were questioned and managed by the downtown CUNY office. And in some cases, these dollars were appropriated correctly, and in other cases, they were appropriated incorrectly, and the adjustments were then made later. So I take responsibility for it because I'm the head of the organization. But there's nothing in these reports nor in any of the audits that suggested any kind of untoward behavior.
Thank you. Okay, so next we have Dan Wisenhunt with Decaturish. Dan, if you're able to, are you able to do this audio by audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dr. Crew, thank you for taking my question. So a New York Times article from 1997 leads with the following. Schools Chancellor Rudy Crew complained yesterday that the independent investigator set up to investigate corruption and misconduct in New York City schools had produced exaggerated reports that were damaging to the schools and the people in them, and said he was going to begin his own investigation of the investigator. And my question is, can you please provide some additional context for this story? When I read that, it comes across as a rebuke of someone who was attempting to hold the school district you were working for accountable. And here's I'll link the article as well in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, in 1997 is going to take me back a ways, but so I want to give you as much accurate information as I can recall. This would have been, among other things, a report done by Ed Stanzik. Ed Stanzik was the investigator that worked under Mayor Giuliani during that time. And there had been a number of these reports. So I don't know exactly which one you're talking about in terms of the headline, but let me just give you a general feel and a context of it. Mr. Stanzik, I think, and God rest his soul, he has passed now, but Mr. Stanzik, I think, did a fairly credible job in rooting out corruption and crime in budgets and so forth in New York City when I was there as chancellor. I supported that most of the time. There were, however, times that it was sensationalized, in my mind, unnecessarily. There were things that he would contextualize as being crime, and in fact, they were not crime at all. There were errors in how certain dollars had been accounted for by school boards, by one of the local school boards, or by one of the superintendents, and so on and so forth. And so I found that there were times that Mr. Stanzik's reporting made complete sense and was actually very helpful to my efforts, along with the mayor's efforts at that time, to rid ourselves of corruption by virtue of removing both superintendents and principals and school board members who had been, frankly, on the take during that period of time. However, there were also times that I think it just simply went too far, and it ended up being, if you will, a sort of a journalistic witch hunt, if you will, and it cast people in unnecessarily negative lights, when in fact those errors should be distinguished as just that. They should have been distinguished as an error, for which there's a different scale of accountability and, frankly, a different standard by which you would look at it. Instead, all of it got lumped together, and all of it ended up sounding as though there was just rampant, massive mayhem and flagrant corruption going on in the system, and that simply wasn't true. In fact, it was later found that with the then Mayor Giuliani's help and the help of Janet Reno, that we were able to go through a process involving the removal of anybody, whether they were elected officials or anybody else who actually had been connected with any of this kind of behavior. And that worked to our advantage. It was part of the reason that I was then given the opportunity as chancellor to remove whole, in some cases, school boards, in other cases, superintendents, in other cases, local principals. All of those cases resulted in lawsuits, and each one of them that I participated in, we won because, in fact, there was a clear line of support that I had been giving to Ed Stanzik for the making obvious of and removing people who had participated in any of those kind of behaviors. So I don't know the headline, to be perfectly honest with you, sir, but I can only tell you that during that time, that was the start of the time when each and every one of these school boards and each and every school superintendent, of which there were 32, I went through every single budget, every single expenditure for them, called in each and every person, each and every school board, for the purpose of being able to review those budgets and to determine whether or not there were appropriate expenditures for the year. I will close in simply saying it also led to our being able to finally put in place in New York City a basis for school-based budgeting that allowed us to really see and be more transparent, both to parents and the community, as to where their dollars were going.
Sorry, little mute issue. Thank you so much. Next, let's go to Fox 5 Atlanta. If you would please, all I have is your outlet. If you would identify yourself, please, when you ask your question. Fox 5, are you still with us? Okay. So we'll come back then.
Sorry, Michelle, I'm trying to unmute them. If they're not unmuting, I'm not sure what there is, but there seems to be a technical issue there. So
Okay.
we'll move to the next one. I'll see if we can get them straightened out.
All right, WXIA then, please, if you would also identify yourself. I don't see who you are there. Thank you. Are we stuck on mute, Robert?
Yeah, hold on. Nobody's getting unmuted here.
I have a question, if I could ask one while you're looking.
Who is
Glenn
speaking?
Morgan. Glenn Morgan.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, sure. Go right ahead. Glenn Morgan, also, please, can you tell us what outlet you're with?
Yes, okay. Actually, I'm Valerie Morgan. I'm with the Uncommon Ground News community paper here. And so, welcome, Dr. Crew. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to ask you, there was some article that I read, I don't have it in front of me because I'm actually on Glenn's computer, that talked about your proposing, or that you had wanted to balance the budget by cutting funding for bilingual education. Can you address that? We have a very diverse population here. I'm sure you must know, within the DeKalb County School District. I wonder what your plans would be for continuing or even improving that part of education.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any time in my career where I have advocated either the cutting of the arts or the cutting of bilingual education. So I know not of what you speak. However, having said that, I have been a proponent, a supporter, an awardee. I cannot support bilingual education enough. As I've indicated to the board, I have somewhat of a, if you will, conversational and polite Spanish-speaking capability. I am as I mentioned earlier in my introductory remarks, I believe in the notion of globalization and people literally graduating out of high schools, if you will, competent in 2 languages. I am never going to be an advocate of cutting of bilingual education. So as I say, I don't know the article or what you're speaking of there, but there's no that I'm aware of. Now, I don't know. I haven't read what you're reading, but no, there's never been a time in my career when I have seen or devalued, if you will, bilingual education. Not only does it speak to the needs of a particular population, but I think it also offers us a chance to enter a deeper conversation about language acquisition for our students' preparation for the global community in which they will live their lives. So I happen to believe that it is really imperative, it's really important for us to understand that bilingualism is not the issue. Monolingualism is the issue. That we need to really address the fact that we have far too many opportunities in elementary and in middle schools and in high schools where we simply start the acquisition of language much later. So there are countless people from around the world and around the country and certainly in the county who actually speak more than one language, more than one, and they are dominant in one, but they have other languages that they speak as well. I think that's the preferred outcome of schools. I think we should be looking at standards that have, if you will, a little bit more of a global emphasis in terms of the knowledge and skill of culture and language that comes with learning a second language, et cetera. So again, I would, you know, I'd love to see the article, but I'm not familiar with anything in any time in my career where I have been an advocate for that would support the reduction in services or reduction in funding for bilingual education.
Thank you. Let's see, can we try Fox 5 again? How we feel about that?
Yeah, I'm still not able to unmute them. Maybe we ask them to see if they can unmute themselves, and maybe that will work, but I'm not able to control.
Okay. And if you're able to hear us, which I'm assuming you are, can you unmute yourself, Fox 5, and try again? I'm gonna give that a shot. Same thing, WXIA. Okay,
Yeah,
here's it.
so
Let me see what this is. I'm not sure if that's who this is from.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, who's that?
Hi, this is Tiffany Sherrod with WXIA.
Oh, okay, so I have you on there twice. Sorry about that. You're showing up in 2 different screens. We're unmuting the wrong one. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what are your top 3 areas of, I guess, improvement for the district that you would like to tackle?
Thank you, Tiffany. One would be literacy. I really think that it's a gateway skill, and we can't say enough about how the knowledge of the brain, the knowledge of language acquisition come together, particularly using the arts as a way of being able for our students to move past 3rd grade with fluency. And that's, in my mind, one of the cornerstone issues that I think we would have to tackle and perhaps do a better job, frankly, around the country, not necessarily just in DeKalb. A second one for me is I really am interested in the issue of parental engagement. I believe very strongly that how parents see their children, how parents engage at home in being able to send the signals about the priority, if you will, of learning, about the fun and the joy of learning. I think that that's a really, really important bedrock, and we can't ever underestimate the value that that offers students as whether they're starting school or whether they're trying to work their way through at some other grade level. The importance of parents being engaged is a really, really, really critical matter for me. A third thing is teacher support, and particularly teacher support through professional development. I really do feel like teachers are really up against an incredible challenge, each of them having said, that's what I want to do with my life. And yet the support for them oftentimes is either non-existent or it's at best timid. And so I think that we really have to talk about how teachers learn, how teachers get supported in their process of evolving into a stronger and better teacher over time. I disagreed with many of the proposals in which this was a time when there was a lot of conversation about just simply evaluate them and put them out, give them a score. If they don't get a high enough score, then they're not a good teacher, and on and on and on. I just don't think it comes down to that. I've been a teacher. I know that there are far too many elements to try to simply congeal all of that around, a number. But I do think it's about learning how to teach. And I think that learning is important, which is the fourth area for me that I'm really concerned with, is about leadership of schools, about how they build and support and create the settings in which teachers really are able to do their best work. I've mentioned just briefly here the idea of language acquisition. Well, I happen to believe that, that learning Spanish would have been easier had we started back in elementary school, or frankly, even in preschool. That having the familiarity of tackling another language, of word formation, of comprehension, each of those things really represents a way that we have to provide a new setting in which teachers would be able to do that. And principals are the ones who provide that setting. They provide the encouragement, they provide the tools, they provide the space, if you will, for creativity, for the utilization of the arts, for the utilization of new and different strategies to be able to enter the human brain. I am excited about the prospect of working with principals, particularly, so that they understand that a good school is made up of really good supervision. It's really about how you have feedback and conversation and focus on teachers and their development and their support and their ability to work with students, regardless of where they come from, what zip code, what language, etc. So I feel that these are some cornerstone issues that have been in my career for a very long time. Unfortunately, many of them are still with us from a standpoint of challenges. So it's not like we've conquered the hill on them, but I do feel as though, we are at a point where DeKalb is, likely to be a real thought partner, a real leader in this area, to the extent that we are prepared and willing to have these deeper dive kind of conversations. So those would be some areas that I'm particularly interested in. I'll close and simply say, I went to business school before I started my teaching career, and I studied economics and management and all of these things. And I thought at the time I wanted to ultimately go into the business world, but I fell in love with economics and still do have a desire to kind of be a sort of a closet economics person. But in so doing, I realized that, what we've got to do is to create opportunities for people to understand that the world markets, whether they're economic markets or financial markets or media markets, whatever these markets are made up of incredibly rich cultural, linguistic, attitudinal, geographical realities that our students are seeing before their very eyes. And I want them to not just see them, I'd like them to experience them. I'd like for their learning to be a part of them. I'd like for them to actually see a way by which they are understanding how to belong to a bigger swatch, if you will, of a world in which there are more and more and more people who look like them, sound like them, have same aspirations as they do, but in fact, maybe living, in Mumbai and so forth. So how we actually translate the reality of a global transformation world, how we translate that into curriculum, into experiences, into mentorships, into internships, these are important things that I would like to, have deeper conversations about.
That's great. So we'll give Fox 5 one more chance. They may just be listening in on purpose. That might be their intent, to listen in. Robert, did you have any luck, or did?
No, I have not.
Okay.
And they're the only ones that I think they may just be videotaping it, and so there's no microphone.
Okay. No
fine.
problem. Oh, so Patrick, I maybe shouldn't make an assumption. Is Patrick Fox Dunwoody Crier? If so, you're next. If not, you're also next. But please let us know who actually you are. If not. Hello, Patrick? Patrick. Okay. So possibly same thing. Maybe he's recording it and has stepped away.
Yes, he's unmuted, so he hasn't responded, but he's unmuted. So,
okay. Well, let's, in the interest of time, let's just move back to Martha Dalton, WABE. If you have another question, please.
Great. Dr. Crew, one thing that's come up during the coronavirus pandemic, not just in DeKalb, but in all of Metro Atlanta, and I'm sure other places in the country, is the realization of how much inequity there is in a lot of school districts. And so there are plenty of kids who don't only lack access to the internet, but they may lack a device, that kind of thing. So undoubtedly, a lot of kids will get behind in school. Right. Have you given any thought at this point to what steps DeKalb may take next year to shore up some of that, to get kids sort of caught up?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Martha. And it's showcasing these holes in our system, not just in the education system, but in the healthcare system and community support systems and so on and so forth. So I agree with your premise. In DeKalb, what I'd like to do would be to follow on the heels of the sort of the companion piece to the allocation of devices that has already been secured. I know the board and the current superintendent have gone out of their way really to bring about the acquisition of laptops and so forth for many students, and yet there are some at the elementary level, as I understand it, that may not necessarily have been in that first wave. So I'd look forward to meeting and talking with outside entities, with technology personnel and companies that would be willing to support our being able to extend these opportunities of getting these devices and connecting them to the internet for students in the rest of the system. I'm doing that right now in my own college, where we're having to, we had to provide immediately, several hundred laptops for students who immediately were going online because we, like everyone else, had to shift to an online platform. So I think that this is going to be one of the good, if you will, if there is such a thing, outcomes of this this time period in which we've all had to, sort of mass migrate onto a new platform. I think that's a good thing. As I said earlier, however, there may be people for whom this isn't the right medium for them. Their brain may not function in this way. They may not learn this way. And what they need is more face-to-face contact, and they need cognition to be connected to a relationship that's more face-to-face, if you will. So I think we ought to be prepared to do both well. And for the people who do not have a device, I think it's going to fall largely upon us to secure that for them, such that they and their families will have access to the curriculum and to the internet.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, if you're still with us for the HAC, would you like to have another question?
Sure. Dr. Crew, one thing that's come up and some of the comments that I've seen online are concerns with your view that I don't think has been laid out from you on vouchers and school choice. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I believe in choice. I believe in choices. As I said, the world of economics is filled with reality that we live in a supply and demand culture, and that offers us a chance to have a myriad of choices. And I don't think the public education system should be any different. So I believe in the notion of choice. I also believe that these choices should be high quality choices. They shouldn't be choices that are essentially a Hobson's choice, in which some things work and some things don't work, and I get to choose from among things that don't work as a parent. I would rather us have really high quality choices that are made possible by the kind of resourcefulness and the kind of collaboration that we have with, whether they be businesses or people inside the system, but a way of being able to have real choices available to parents and children. Now, the systems that have delivered those choices include the following. Number one, charters. I think charters have been a choice, and I think that they offer a choice, and I have no qualms with that. I don't think, however, that that is the raison d'etre of public education. I think that it's a reality of public education, and it's something that we ought to make sure is a high quality, good choice. But nonetheless, it is not lesser or more, if you will, than what would be considered a traditional public school. So I support the idea of choices, including charters. I just don't think we can get into the parlance, if you will, into the business of trying to make one better than the other, which is unfortunately how the politics of charters came down. This was not necessarily a choice among equals. This became a better choice. And it became that way because it was, if you will, brought about in a much more political environment than an educational environment. Secondly, I would say that around vouchers, that's another system. And it was a system that was advocated at that time by the then mayor of New York City when I was chancellor. And that system, I do not consider to be a better choice, if you will, by comparison to a traditional public school. Why? I think it's not a better choice because fundamentally it is totally dependent upon someone else's non-public dollar driving how that will lay out. And it basically competes not with public schools per se, but it competes with the idea of funding of public schools. And so in New York, when Rudy wanted to essentially privatize public education by virtue of giving all of these private dollars to public schools to be able to essentially create a voucher system, I disagreed with that. I don't agree with that system. I never have agreed with that system. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't agree with it because it is going to ultimately rule out people who may not be in a place where some major corporation is literally providing $1 gazillion to a school and they get the benefit of not having that in their school. So it's not scalable. It's not a way of being able to respond to what essentially is, and I talk about this all the time, which is you got a 60-40 split. You got about 40% of the population for whom public education is still, in their minds, not functioning for them. So, a very small percentage of these schools going into a voucher system is what was intended. This was not intended to be a full-scale new school system. And so I don't see the benefit of a 3% solution to a 40% problem. If you want to change the way schooling happens for the vast majority of people who are caught in bad schools, then change the system of those bad schools. Create new and different avenues for students in those schools. Build a new standard of literacy in those schools. Provide new and different resources, new and different opportunities for students to learn, more opportunities for parents to be a part of that learning. Do that, but don't tell me we're going to create a side-by-side system made up of money from XYZ Corporation. I just don't believe that.
Mr. Belcher, do you have another question?
Something on about you at noon today. About a year, maybe 15 months ago, the law firm for the district studied the procurement system, and among the conclusions was, and I quote, "The current district culture is one in which ethics and integrity in procurement has not been emphasized." You're going to be facing tight budgets. What are you going to do to make sure that you've got a cleanly run procurement system?
Well, it begins with having a strong, clear-headed person or people involved in procurement, number one. We've got to have leadership that is ethical, leadership that is knowledgeable, and leadership that is filled with the opportunity to follow through on making sure that all of our procurement processes work and that they work efficiently. Number two, I'm going to be looking at all contracts that get let. These aren't small contracts, by the way. These are generally contracts that deal with school equipment, materials, supplies, etc. And how we ultimately do that work becomes really important to the integrity of the system as a whole. I know this has been a concern of the boards. It's been a concern for many people in the system over the course of multiple years. I've read some of the reports on DeKalb in this area, and it's been a problem in the past. So getting it clean and getting it right becomes my responsibility, and I'll start by the hiring of people who are really strong in this area. And number three, I think we've got to actually pay attention to the status of procurement as it relates to women, minority contracts and contractors who are actually going to be providing some of these services to the extent that we find new and different people in the community to let them to. So I think the procurement process has some problems, I'm sure. It does everywhere. I don't think, as I said, when you ascribe that to either Medgar Evers College or to CUNY, I mean, I think that any organization on any given day you're gonna find that there are snafus here and there, but that's different from misappropriation of funding or funding that has been inefficiently allocated or ineffectively used. So I will be, if you will, managing that from the outset. I've already gotten a copy of any of the audits that have been done in the system. I do know that there have been, as I said, some issues about this in the past, and it will be one of my first high priorities challenges to get to the bottom of as soon as I get there.
Thank you. Dan Wisenhunt, Decaturish, do you have another question?
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Crier, for taking our questions. I actually had two questions on this, and for the sake of time, I'm going to combine them into one. A state comptroller report from Medgar Evers College dated June 3rd, 2016 had the following findings. One, Rudy Crew used $32,421 in tax levy funds to buy furniture for his home. The funds were supposed to be used for a child care center and student fees. Two, Rudy Crew charged $2,088 on a Medgar Evers College credit card to pay personal cable bill and buy electronic equipment. There was another story from Oregon that alleged that you had the school district there pay for travel that was actually travel that was personal for you. It wasn't related to school district business. So in two different districts and two different jobs, you've been accused of using public funds for your personal use. Can you address that? Can you explain that?
Sure. So let me take them one by one. This $32,000, frankly, I thought the number was 26, but nonetheless, this amount of money was provided for me when I became president of Medgar Evers College, and was given to me by the then Vice Chancellor for Finance. It was, as my understanding, within the first, I started July 15th or something in 2013. Within the first first 6 months of my being, 6 weeks of my being there, I received a call from the Vice Chancellor indicating two things. Number one, here's how we handle the president's homes. Here's how we handle the purchase of materials for their homes, for their apartments in New York or a home. This was given to me by a phone call, which then later became a conversation with the then person on my campus, who was the person in charge of getting materials and buying furniture and so on and so forth. I was given permission by, his name is Alan Dobrin. I was given permission by Mr. Dobrin as Vice Chancellor for Finance to go out and get, at that time, $27,000. You have up to $27,000 to buy buy equipment for your residents. The previous president had material that he had then used, tables, chairs, etc., used, and it had gone to the college. It had been reverted to the college. There was an expectation that, as I understood it, presidents will do entertaining, they will do donor solicitation, etc. So you need to get this done as soon as you possibly can so you can have your home set up to being able to do that. And I went ahead and did that. I went to one store, got tables and chairs and that sort of thing. Bedding I did not buy. There was nothing about this that represented a personal purchase for myself. Anything like that, I simply had transported to my new place of residence in New York, and I did exactly what was understood to be the procedure for the acquisition of equipment and furniture for the president's residence. Given the fact that my predecessor had taken everything out, or it had reverted to the college. Secondly, and that was in the amount of, as I say, I want to say 28,000 or 26,000, but I don't know where this 32 comes from. The second thing, this $2,800, I'm not, again, I don't remember these numbers, but CUNY went through a major audit as defined by and required by the governor based upon some impropriety that had been happening in another campus. And so it led to everybody having to essentially bring their books in and account for them. The $2,800, as I recall having this conversation with the people in the financial commission and the lawyers there, this $2,800 really represented the way that my contract as president was in some ways being paid. And unbeknownst to me, some of it went onto a credit card. Now, when they set up my housing arrangement, they set it up via another office. I didn't have anything to do with it. They pay electricity, they pay for your cable bill, your fax, if you have one, and all of that sort of thing, because you have to oftentimes, as we are now, work from home. All of that was done in complete knowledge and in a forthright way with the approval of the financial people, either at 42nd Street or in my own finance department. It's just a question of where did they charge it. And when they found it that it had been charged to that, they dinged me. They said, wow, this shouldn't have been charged there. It should have been charged to another account. So, you know, I take responsibility for it because I don't believe in ducking any of these things, but I will tell you that there was never any quote unquote personal use of any of these dollars that the state or anybody else found as a part of this audit. They went through an extremely rigorous auditing process. I spent 6 hours of testimony going through every single expenditure for the better part of 4.5 years. You know, there was no finding that impugned my thinking, judgment, or character. The last one with respect to Oregon. So Oregon was an environment in which there had been the establishment of something called the Oregon Education Investment Board. It was a newly minted idea, if you will, from the then governor, John Kitzhaber, and his idea was to link preschool, elementary school, high school, and universities all under one tent. And that linkage was going to be governed by an investment board. And that board had a new person, and that new person was me. I was excited about doing this because I had written a book to this effect, and believe very strongly that this is a new kind of architecture that makes sense, particularly for communities where we didn't see very high college going rates and where there needed to be more continuity of supports and services grade by grade for students to be able to onboard into 2 or 4 year institutions. So I was excited about this. What I did not know, and I frankly, you know, fault myself for this, but what I did not know is that in taking this job, there had been no budget appropriated for this job. There was no particular rules or regulations that had been adopted or appropriated for this job. And so I came to Oregon kind of, if you will, bare knuckled and willing to jump in and begin this work, but did so without the benefit of either a biennial budget or without knowing how does, you know, to the other gentleman's question, how does it work here in terms of your, you know, procurement cycle, going out, taking a travel trip, et cetera. And so what I did was I explained to the governor that I knew people in other places where I could, if I could get in front of them, I would be able to raise some money for this effort. When I say there was no money, I mean there wasn't $5,000 to handle a school in rural Oregon that needed books. There wasn't $2,000 to be able to do that. Every nickel and dime had to be raised from the outside. And so I asked the governor if I could go to some of these high wealth individuals for the purpose of being able to raise money. Some of these people, I was on a board in Nassau, Bahamas, an international board run by Templeton. And there were high wealth individuals with whom I had worked in a previous life, and I knew, having lived there for some period, that they would be willing to support some of this work. I also went to USC, where I had been a professor, and I asked for research assistants to help us to get on the ground to do data, baseline data gathering, so that we'd have some way of measuring the work that I was about to do from baseline to first year. Again, no money to being able to do any of this. I did take a trip to Los Angeles, no question about it. I went a weekend. I spent a weekend with with one of the professors at USC. I did that I left, I think it was on a Friday. Thursday. I went to a Friday class and I came back that Sunday. I did go to the Bahamas. I went with the idea of being able to try to do some fundraising among people with whom I was already on a board with high wealth individuals, as an effort to try to help the state of Oregon get enough resources that we could at least start this job. It did not work out. Suffice it to say, it did not work out. And in truth, I went to the governor to say, after 6 months of this isn't, I can't be a one-person show here. And there's got to be a way where, there's got to be some support. And within weeks of that, I was talking with other legislators. I was talking with other people in the state of Oregon. But essentially their query was, you know what, we just don't have money. We're not sure the governor is going to stay. We're not sure the governor is going to remain, et cetera, et cetera. So the political currency had dried up. And at that point, I went back to the governor and said, you know what, there just is no work here. This is a great idea. I like it very much. I wish that, I had known a little bit more about the funding base here, because it would have changed my decision, frankly. But nonetheless, I'm in the process of leaving, because there's just no there there. And that's really the story of Oregon.
Thank you. So we're going to, if everybody will indulge us, because we had some technical difficulties, we're going to continue a little bit longer, and hopefully everybody will be able to get 2 questions. We're going to move next to Ms. Sherrod, if you're still there with WXIA. Thought I saw you. Did you step off? Okay. Okay, then great. Then we're going to go back to Valerie Morgan with Uncommon Ground News.
Let me see, am I working? Am I on?
You are on, and you will be our final question for today.
Okay, great. So, Dr. Crew, I would like for you to just share some of your views about achieving parity with underperforming schools in the district. Several superintendents have tried. What are your thoughts about how to get those schools up to par with others, so that we don't have this great divide between South and North DeKalb?
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot as I've gone through the data. So part of it is a resource question. I don't know the per capita spending on one school versus the other yet. I haven't had the chance to get that deep into the actual budget and the allocations according to schools or regions. But I can only assume that, much like New York, there are schools on the Upper East Side and schools in Harlem that have different appropriations. And the question of redistribution of wealth, if you will, comes immediately to the floor, right? Now, there was a question that was asked earlier about what do I say to people to convince them that I'm, not the demon that maybe some of these articles point to. And I would say to you that anytime you do redistribution of resources, anytime you literally begin thinking about ways by which to share dollars in a different construct than what they used to be done, you are going to pay a price, especially over the issues of race and class. You're going to pay a price. Now, I've paid those prices. You're going to read about them. You can hear about them. I have no qualms. I'm not even apologizing for them. I'm just simply saying that is part of the reason that, you know, you're going to read some negative things about me. I believe very strongly that you can equalize the playing field by, part of it is to really redistribute resources in a meaningful way. The other part is to add to the pie, make the pie a larger pie. There are costs that are different for educating a child who is 3 years or 4 years behind in grade level than compared to a student who's on grade level. There's just a different cost in that. There is also a need for us to really talk about what leverages new and different learning. So parents can be a part of that leveraging of new and different learning. I think that we've got to really harness the power of parents at home. Now, we haven't done this in public education forever, right? This has been something we've been talking about and giving lip service to, in my mind, forever. Something I did in Miami and something I did in New York, and I even did it at my college, is called a Parent Academy. And the Parent Academy was my way of basically saying, if my father was still alive and he was still trying to put me through school, he needed to learn, he needed to know, what does he even need to ask for in order for me to be able to go to college? What about the SAT? What about the PSAT? What about after school tutorial? What about Regents exams? What about all these preparation programs and so on and so forth? He would not have known to ask for those things. Parents in some of the most underperforming schools oftentimes don't know what to even ask for to help their children at home. They'll do it if you give them access to it and tell them how to use it and tell them how important it is to a child's going forward. So I think we've got an education job to do with parents around how they can leverage themselves into the learning equation of their children. That's really important to me, because these parents, in a supply and demand world, these parents are always living on the supply side. I'm suggesting we got to have them flip that switch and be on the demand side. So I want them to go through, and I'd love for DeKalb to consider this idea, and something I would want to bring to the board of, let's create an academy in which parents can learn, here are the things by grade level that my child even needs to know. Here are the things that I have to provide for my child at home. Here's what the homework assignment looks like. Here's what the assessments look like. Here are the things that I can do to leverage my child into yet another set of credits if he or she is interested in it. When Martha asked the question, I think it was Martha asked the question about, how are we going to pivot out of coronavirus into a new world? Part of that pivot is we're going to have to provide a whole new architecture by which to give students a chance to catch up. You can't just simply assume that everybody's at home right now doing what we're doing over an algebra class. They're not. So for me, it's going to be important for us to really redesign the way we think about the school day, the school year, the intersession, so that by the time students come back from this period of time, that they actually see a system that is reaching out to them to pull them into brand new opportunities that they can make up credit, they can learn skills that they didn't learn, they can be enriched and given opportunities, whether it be in language or in the arts or in other experiences. We got to give them, a double dose of a lot of things. It's just going to have to come in a different format.
Thank you, Dr. Crew. Thank you, everybody, for taking part today. I know this is a complicated format, and we all look forward to meeting Dr. Crew in person. Please remember that Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. we will have a virtual town hall where we will be asking and answering questions that the community has submitted. So if you would let your audiences know, they can still submit their questions, and they can go to the DeKalb County School website. In order to submit their questions, there's multiple ways that they can do that. But if you'll go to the homepage of the DeKalb County website, DeKalb County Schools website, you'll be able to do that. And again, thank you to everyone, and thank you, Dr. Crew. We will
Thank you.
see you Wednesday night. Everybody be safe. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.